welcome back to That's Entertainment. Today I have Andy Chatterley, the CEO of MUSO, the anti-piracy and tracking service. Welcome, Andy.
Well, thank you very much.
What have you been seeing on the piracy side that you're finding very interesting right now?
We saw a big increase in March for the first lockdown, especially on film, a really marked increase. I think, from memory, 80% increases over that month in places like India and Italy. We saw really interesting genre changes. The day that schools were locked down in the UK, a big rise in piracy demand for kids' movies or animated movies. Probably the most interesting thing that we saw, however, was as that first lockdown went on, piracy for films decreased in May and June and July. Conversely, piracy for TV, maintained its level. It's still really high. And then drilling into the numbers, what we realized was people saw the films that they wanted to see. And don't get me wrong, piracy was still very, very high. I mean, we tracked 130 billion visits to piracy sites throughout the course of the year. But comparatively speaking, we saw this kind of increase and then decrease down quite significantly in film piracy. It started to come up again with the second lockdown that we've seen in the sort of November, December, and now into January data. But there was that definite decrease where the titles were moved and the consumption wasn't there. We've seen some really interesting trends in things over-indexing and under-indexing.
Okay.
Obviously, that's based on a geographical region, has certain nuances to it. But we've seen rise of fantasy films in certain countries, more escapism. There's been a really marked increase in the Harry Potter collection. In piracy, like really marked, really quite significant across all of the different films amongst that collection. So certain types of genres have increased in films, definitely, and that does have a geographical skew to it as well.
As the rights are getting clawed back to the original rights owners because they're now releasing their own streaming platforms, do you think that's a major driver for something like the Harry Potter series?
I think it's a major driver for piracy, generally. I think if you compare it to the music industry, for example, where piracy is still quite large amongst certain types of piracy for music, but because there's no exclusivity, because largely if you subscribe to Spotify, you don't need to subscribe to Apple because they have a similar level of content on. I think unlike music, film and TV platforms, video on demand platforms have exclusive content. And I wrote a piece for Forbes about cancel culture amongst subscriptions. I called it subscription fatigue, where I think we are seeing that, people have one or two services, but maybe not three. And if they want a title that's not available on the one they have, then perhaps they turn to other methods to consume that title. So yeah, I think it's interesting that in relation to COVID-19, I think we almost have this perfect storm of massive increased demand of these services and this way of consuming movies, a lack of theatrical releases because of cinemas being closed and films like James Bond being pushed out time and time again, combined with a exclusivity of titles across different platforms and a coming economic, shock because of COVID-19. It's almost like a perfect storm, really, in some ways, for piracy to increase for film and TV content.
What changes are you seeing happening in the way that films are being collected, and also how are they being displayed now?
There's a tendency with piracy data to kind of with the audience and also with the numbers to kind of put it into this pot of this is piracy. And actually what we're finding, the more data that we have and the more our data scientists sort of analyze and look behind the numbers, is it's a really nuanced picture. So if you take cam rips, for example, which you referred to before, we do see quite high cam rips on some titles and some genres. But for example, on blockbusters, on titles like Tenet, the cam rip distribution was quite different because we at MUSO, we monitor illegal web streaming, which is streaming but via unlicensed sites, and P2P, so torrents, which is the kind of poster boy of piracy, downloading directly in a peer-to-peer way. And with those kind of titles, there's blockbuster titles. We're seeing much more of a leaning towards ownership on, for certain countries, especially the BRICS nations like Russia and Brazil, for that kind of genre. Yet for other genres, where it's less blockbuster, more something you might want to consume quickly, then we'd see more of a skewing towards camera-ips for countries like the US and Western, more developed countries. So it's difficult to, my point really is it's difficult to just sort of put it all into one bucket and say that's piracy data. It varies so much based on the type of content, the genre, the country, the availability in that particular territory that you're referring to, that we're referring to. So it's difficult to say. In terms of other technologies that are coming forward, I mean, some of the changes that we've seen over the years are really in the kind of ways that people access content. So for example, for TV content, within our data set, we break it down by content and by site and by country. So for TV content, I think 93% of all TV content goes via illegal streaming sites, which is huge. If you're just looking at P2P torrents for TV, you're missing 93% of the market. With films, illegal streaming makes around about 58%, I think, from memory. So again, if you're only looking in P2P, you're getting a specific view, but not much of the picture, comparatively speaking. So, I couldn't say how much is going to become app driven or behind private gateways, or what the next technical evolution of piracy is going to be. But I think one thing we've definitely seen over the years is that consuming habits in the real world are reflected in piracy. So, in the real world, we've become used to video on demand. We've become used to one click and we can access those films and TV shows, and it's definitely that activity is mirrored in piracy. People want quick access. They want to really illegally stream it. But like I say, it's nuanced because some people still prefer to wait for the HD version to be released. So much of it depends on what the windowing strategy is. So when we compare windowing strategies in the first 90 days of titles, how long the theatrical window is really has a big impact on piracy. Whether they go straight to a digital release has a big impact on piracy. What kind of genre it is has a big impact on piracy. So, but these are all questions that piracy data can help answer and help, impact the strategies, the release strategies for companies releasing content. Someone I was speaking to, their mum was looking for a TV show or a film, and they went onto Google and they typed it in and it came up. And in fact, this lady told me that her mum was then amazed that she could watch all kinds of other movies on this site as well. And that's to a certain degree, I wouldn't say part of the problem, but certainly one issue, which is that one or two clicks from a search engine, you can find yourself in a site that you're watching many titles that you might be interested in. And so that unwitting pirate probably exists, the unsuspecting pirate. There's this view that I'm given quite often, which is pirates are mainly 18 to 25-year-old males who download content onto hard drives, and they're this kind of lost audience, this audience that you can't convert. But the reality is, and we see this time and time again in the data, in that demographic data, in the types of content being downloaded, the reality is that it's a very, very broad cross-section of society of consuming content on this platform of piracy, however you describe piracy, whatever the websites are. So yeah, I suspect absolutely a fair number of them are completely unaware that they're doing anything illegal.